Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer here at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa. Dylan Tovitz and Graham Bacco joining me today. A bitter ending to a special season for Vanderbilt football. In a lot of ways, Dylan, I always thought this would end in some sort of celebration. Vanderbilt set the program wins record. Clark said tonight it was the best team in program history. And when it's all over, uh, they're running into the tunnel. Diego Pavia kind of fades off into a group of guys, and that's the last you see of him in a Vanderbilt uniform. Josh Singh leaves the field in tears. Richie Hoskins does the same thing while hugging Jerry Kill, Jordan White hobbling off with his arm around Chris Konakis. A bitter ending in so many ways, and doing it. I think the narrative of fate and destiny in sports often falls flat on its face. But I mean, this was the best team in program history. It felt like they were destined for something better than this. They were um, in a position where they deserved to be celebrating when it was all over. There was a lot of things today, though, where Iowa was just pushing it around on the line of scrimmage. Vanderbilt, Clark Lee said, was one stop away from winning the game. I mean, it didn't do enough to win. It didn't do enough to celebrate tonight. Just a really tough ending for this group to a season in which I think all of us kind of envisioned that they'd have the confetti falling on their heads and they'd be celebrating with a trophy at the end of it. That's not the case, though, and it's a humble reminder of just how cruel college sports can be.
Yeah, for sure, Joey. And it was, like you said, a bitter ending. And I agree with what you said that it felt like even, sitting watching that game there in the third quarter, fourth quarter, it felt like, they were going to pull something off and they were going to make a comeback, especially the way the offense kind of started to click, and ultimately just fell up short. There were too many mistakes in that first half. We'll talk about the Nick Haber punt fiasco, I guess is a good term for it. And the other countless mistakes that were made, and the defense just couldn't get that late stop. But it's certainly a sour ending to a historic and a special season, and frankly a special era of Vanderbilt football, which you could call it now, over the last two seasons. Is you saw Diego Pavia, that will almost 100% be his last game in a Vanderbilt uniform, his last collegiate game as he moves on. Eli Stowers obviously didn't play, but it'll be it was kind of marked the end of that era as well. Who knows who else is going to come back? Whether we'll see the same coaching staff and whatnot. So it was definitely a tough ending, and I'm sure we'll get into these mistakes, but and I'm sure Clark had this message in the post game, but don't let that take away from the fact that this was the best, season, at least the best regular season in Vanderbilt football history. And Iowa played a really good game, and so it's a credit to them, which I'm sure Clark's number one message in that presser. But yeah, definitely, a sour ending. Didn't execute the way it needed to through, all four quarters of the game. So didn't end the way they wanted to, for sure, guys.
Yeah, Graham, I'll swing it to you here by setting the scene a little bit. Barkley gets to the podium, and it didn't even take him 2 minutes to start fighting back tears once he was up there. Uh, and you're just looking at them going into the tunnel, and it's like these guys have done so much for this program. Eli Stowers, one of the all-time greats within it, he's walking in there with his head down. It wasn't fitting. It was almost eerie that a group that has so many moments that you can't take away from it, so many achievements that you can't take away from it, their final moment together and this core that Clark Lee has built that's kind of changed the direction of Vanderbilt football over the years. The final impression we have of them is a lot of guys with tears in their eyes and a lot of guys walking into the tunnel with a great deal of hurt. I guess just go off that scene, Graham, and uh, articulate kind of what this means, because I think it is a heartbreaker and a bitter night in a lot of ways for Vanderbilt, especially since this ending didn't come in the college football playoff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, first I had the disappointed the playoff, and I really wonder what's going through those players' minds. Like, do they think, are they taking themselves? Are they taking away the fact of how great this season was just because of what happened today? Like, hopefully they don't sort of downplay the season that they've had because obviously it's been a historic season. One that's still going to be remembered in Nashville for years and probably even decades to come, right? So. I don't think the players themselves should feel super disappointed when they look back. And obviously they did not have the day that they wanted to. Sort of going off the bittersweet ending. I mean, in the fate part of it, I thought, going along with you guys, I kind of felt like this, a fitting end would have been, a Vanderbilt victory and standing on a podium, on the field, celebrating what would have been an 11-2 season. But turns out didn't happen. But yeah, it's just one of those things where that's just sports, man. Like that you're gonna have these games and you're gonna have these seasons where you have an amazing season and then at the end it just sort of you just fall short of your goal in your ultimate dream. But again, let's not take away the fact that this was a very historic season. And hopefully, like I said, hopefully the players, when they look back on this after some time has passed and they look back on the season and they'll realize sort of the magnitude and the effect and the impact that they've had, not only on just Vanderbilt University, but also the Nashville area as well. I mean, let's remember, like, Vanderbilt, like before this season and before Pavia and Stowers and everyone came to town, like Vanderbilt wasn't really talked about, even in the city of Nashville, as always the Titans or the Predators, right? But throughout the season, just with the season that they've had, like the talk of the town has been Vanderbilt. The talk about the town has been Clark Lee and Pavia and just what they've built together. And so, let's just not forget that, and let's just not forget just the season that they've had, and hopefully the players won't either.
Yeah, Dylan, I'll swing it to you for some football analysis here. I think we've talked a lot about the moment, and I think it's certainly important to do so tonight to remember kind of what they've done. But I mean, Iowa was just gashing them up front all night on both sides of the ball. You look at Iowa's offense, and they had 212 passing yards, 212 receiving yards, obviously, and then 167 rushing yards on 4.5 yards per carry. I think that includes the 2 sacks that Vanderbilt had on Gronowski. I mean, they just didn't do enough up front. And I think that was the first time that we had really seen Vanderbilt's offensive line in particular crack like that. They couldn't open any holes in the run game. Diego Pavia was sacked, I think, more than he was all season. It's hard to win like that. And Vanderbilt made a valiant effort, a valiant comeback. But when you block the way they did, and when you get gashed up front on the other side of the ball the way they did, you're not going to win many football games against a team like that. And obviously, it's the Joe Moore Award winners. Still, the point remains, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll start on, the defensive side because I think there's more to talk about, but there's also less to talk about because frankly it wasn't there's not a lot of good that came out of that defensively. And we've talked a lot this season, guys, about how Vanderbilt's defense has been kind of a roller coaster, up and down. And, they'll go out there and you think of the Auburn game where they let up who knows how many yards and 30 something, a lot of points. I don't remember the exact score, but to a backup quarterback and a brand new coach. And the defense looked like one of the worst in the country. And then you come back and you look at other games, you look at the Missouri game, even the Tennessee game to an extent, and they played a really strong game. And you definitely got the bad defense today, and I think that was perhaps even a little more painful for fans to watch, just because Iowa's offense is it's not as dynamic as some of these other offenses that Vanderbilt's played in the SEC. I think they came in 57th in the country in scoring in the Big Ten. So it's not a bad offense. And, the offensive line is obviously really strong up front. And I thought Mark Gronowski played, a really good game, maybe even a surprisingly, good game. But there was not a lot of good on that defense. I thought Bryce Cowan shined. He was all over the place making plays. I don't like the snap counts are out there, but he was either on the field a lot more. If he wasn't, it felt like he was because of the impact he was making. And Josh Singh had some moments up front as well, but the secondary was gashed a lot. And I thought Steve Gregory didn't really have many answers. It felt like he was blitzing a lot, but the blitzes weren't exactly working in the sense that he was blitzing a safety, blitzing a corner. They were getting picked up, and then the secondary was just they had lighter personnel, and Gronowski wasn't getting sacked, so or getting pressured at least. So it was a weak defensive game, and ultimately, and as Clark said, they needed that stop there. Late in the fourth quarter, and they didn't get it. Especially after I thought he actually played that situation with the field goal down 10 correctly. You take your chance there, even though the defense seemingly couldn't get a stop. The odds of getting a 3-and-out there is still much higher than recovering an onside kick. So I thought that was the right choice. And the defense ultimately just didn't perform, guys. So that's my sort of what I thought defensively. I guess Graham, I'm sure you have some thoughts on defense as well. Before I also have offensive thoughts, but I guess we
Yeah.
can start on the defense.
Yeah, and honestly, one of the things that I thought set the tone defensively was the start of the game, the very first possession. I believe it was third and long,
Yep,
and it was one of the few times that Vanderbilt got to
good point.
Gronowski, and then you have Miles Capers just whiffing on a sack that would have, sent in a punt, and Gronowski, he escapes and runs 44 yards down the field to, I believe, the Vanderbilt 20-yard line or somewhere around there, and they score a touchdown a couple plays later. I
Yeah,
felt like
it's a quiet
that
game
really
for
set the
Capers.
exactly. Yeah, like I felt like that really set the tone defensively, and it's like, man, like when you're not tackling, and that sort of reminded me of the tackling from the Texas game because if you remember, first play of the game, you miss a couple tackles like
Yep.
on that bubble screen, and then went for that 75-yard touchdown, and it's similar. I felt like similar today, where I think it was a second possession actually where there's 3rd and 7 or something, Iowa. They Vanderbilt missed a tackle, and then the tight end goes 51 yards down the field. Now, of course, Vanderbilt Martel Height did get the interception in the next play, but you just have like the sloppy tackling and missed opportunities just throughout defensively, and then of course the Joe Moore winners. It's like even on these downs where it was clear and obvious Iowa was going to run the ball. They still could not stop them. I mean, and that's a credit. You have to credit Iowa in that. You have to credit Coach Ferentz and the Iowa offensive line in that. But I mean, it's just disappointing, right, to see just Vanderbilt just have all these missed opportunities and just still just never really be able to come up with a key stop. Even when it felt like Vanderbilt pulled it within 31-24, Iowa didn't matter. Like they just kept going right down the field, running the ball, chewing clock, 7-minute drive to go up 10 and effectively end the game. And so defensively, I just felt like it was pretty disappointing. And I think we were all sort of waiting for that moment defensively in the second half because the offense had turned it on. And we'll talk about the offense here in a minute, but the offense had turned it on. But so it just kind of felt like to me, eventually the defense is going to get that key stop or that key turnover, and it just never happened. And that was the difference in the game.
Yeah, Vanderbilt went, or Vanderbilt allowed 50% third down conversion. It felt like they couldn't get off the field. That's 6 of 12. Iowa went 6 of 12 on offense on third down. Vanderbilt just 2 for 9. I thought that was another. It wasn't like they were, gashing them with explosive plays like maybe, Vanderbilt was on the other side with the big Trey Richardson deep ball and a couple other big plays. But, 167 rushing yards on the ground. I'm just looking through here. There were it felt like it was like slowly ripping out Vanderbilt's heart on defense there, where they were moving methodically down the field. I think Gronowski was more of a passing threat than we thought he was going to be, but this was still not a super dynamic offense, right? Like there was, it was somewhat predictable, and Vanderbilt really just didn't have many answers, especially late in the second half, guys. It felt a lot like the Texas game a little bit, in terms of game script, obviously a little bit different, because Vanderbilt was in a deeper, earlier hole. Defense kind of turned it on there at the end, but ultimately, it wasn't enough. So, yeah, I think we covered the defense. Joe, you got any last thoughts there?
Yeah, one play that I think you guys had kind of hit it at, but the 3rd and 7 late in the game on the drive that Iowa got the field goal, where Steve Gregory did opt to blitz. He
Yeah.
sent a lot of guys, and you got Marlon Sewell in one-on-one with probably their best player today, and he loses the one-on-one. Those are the types of things that Clark Lee has tried to avoid, right? Like he's tried to upgrade the talent level to where you don't have to have a guy you're not super comfortable with in that spot. Not saying they're not comfortable with Sewell, but he loses the one-on-one there, and it's not only that's not the only reason Vanderbilt lost the game. Who knows if it gets the 4th down conversion instead of kicking the field goal? But guys, that was just a complete backbreaker. And I think when Iowa completed that pass, and it wasn't even a great throw from Gronowski, I thought it was a little behind the receiver, and the coverage was just not good enough to make an impact there. That was a play that I think was maybe emblematic of some of the issues they had getting off the field, and I guess just being physical enough and winning one-on-ones on the perimeter. I thought they would do better against Iowa's receivers. To be frank with you, especially I thought they'd do better with Iowa's tight ends. We'll go to the offense. I've got one note, and I'll write this for tomorrow, but we'll tell people on the podcast first. Junior Sherrill did tell me he's coming back next year for Vanderbilt, and that he will play his senior year at Vanderbilt. I don't think it's a huge surprise, but he was the only guy we talked to with remaining eligibility. We've got stuff with Langston Patterson, Corday Sidner, and him coming in the next day, but he's fine, and he appears to be excited about the opportunity to come back and return to Vanderbilt. So, Dylan, you've told us you have offensive thoughts. You've hyped yourself up here. Take the floor for a second, and then don't eat up all the air. Give Graham some takes to spew as well.
Of course, always. Yeah, I mean the offense really it felt like a tale of two halves, which is what it was, And I thought there were a lot of flaws in that first half offense, and you could talk about the mistakes. You can talk about, the punt turnover, and maybe Pavia missed a few big throws there. The first thing was I felt like there was not a you know large enough effort to establish the run. I believe through the first two drives they didn't have a single handoff, and Vanderbilt finished with just 51 rushing yards, and I think 36 of those were Pavia's. So the run game was pretty non-existent. And I think Iowa did a good job stopping the run, so it's not necessarily that simple that you run the ball more, but I think they struggled with the pass because they never established the run. You hear that phrase a lot, in the coaching realm, like, oh, you got to establish the run. And sometimes it's overused, and sometimes it's like, well, if you have, Trey Richardson can just run by their secondary, then he should do that. And yes, that is true. But at the same time, there's a game theory aspect here where if Iowa knows you're going to pass, then they can run their pass defense over and over again, and they can run their, pass blitzes. And that's what happened in the first half. And there was really just not a lot of, um, run game at all. So that was my first thought. And I think it worked in the second half where they really didn't run the ball at all. And that was, because they got in that up tempo. Pavia got in his rhythm. I thought the play calling was a little bit better, but in that first half, there were really no answers, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Eli Stowers wasn't playing and he wasn't out there. And there's an article up on the site about that already. I wrote it right after the game. Um, Stowers does a lot of things for this offense, and I think if you look into it, you can kind of see it in that first half. Yes, he can be a big play threat, and he can, go grab balls up the seams, but he really where he thrives for Pavia is that kind of safety valve. And him and Pavia have this connection that if his internal clock, Diego's internal clock is running out, he's going to trust that Stowers is going to be open, and if he's not open, he's going to beat his man and make a tightly contested catch. And that's how you avoid those plays, those sacks. And the offensive line wasn't great, and I'm sure we'll get to that. I know Graham, you probably have thoughts on the offensive line on both sides of the ball, but I thought you saw Pavia get a little bit jittery in the pocket there where the sacks were coming on those designed plays, and that was because he didn't have Stowers. And the other thing is there was a lot of just like really deep, 10-yard Diego Pavia dropbacks and try to throw it long. And you saw that with the deep balls. There was very little of the option game, the shovel passes, that speed out where Pavia kind of does that little loop thing to his left and, throws it to Stowers for a 6-yard gain quickly. There was not a lot of that at all. And it was these deep dropbacks. And that is what led to, the Iowa pressures, the sacks, and the fact that Vanderbilt only scored 3 points. So I thought there were some flaws, certainly in that first half, and ultimately in that second half, they got in. There weren't any drastic changes. It was more they got in their tempo and they got in their rhythm, and Pavia was, succeeding more and hitting on those deep balls, and Trey Richardson and Junior Show were getting open down the field. But so definitely a tale of two halves. I thought there were certainly some flaws there, and I think a lot of that can be seen in the fact that Eli Stowers, who is such a key weapon in a number of ways for this offense, and I think that's something we're gonna have to look towards when we talk about next year without Pavia and Stowers for that matter. But I'll swing it over to you, Graham. I'm sure you have more thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. I thought, one of the early stories on in the game was just Iowa's defensive pressure going up against Vanderbilt's offensive line. I mean, simply enough, like Vanderbilt just did not do that great a job of pass protection. Simply, obviously the run game, like you said, is non-existent. Like, so protection-wise, the offensive line didn't really hold up until they switched to the up tempo later in the game. I mean, they had Iowa sacked Pavia 4 times in the first half, which is the most Vanderbilt has been sacked in a first half this season. And I think play calling wise, I think it was very interesting. I think in the first half, they're sort of, I guess treating it like they wanted to control the game with the clock and just sort of go at a slower pace, sort of like how Vanderbilt has won plenty of games in the past. Just control the clock, control the game, just I'll
Mhm.
go on these long methodical drives. And they realized they couldn't do that once Iowa went up 14-3 and eventually 21-3. And so they switched up to the up tempo, which I think did wonders for them, honestly. I think the up tempo worked pretty well. It reminded me of the Auburn game, how they sort of started off slow offensively, and then once they
Yeah.
went up tempo, they were scoring at will. They were moving the ball at will, and it was pretty similar to here today. Although I think today, as we saw, is just too little, too late. I mean, I wonder what would have happened if maybe they went up tempo, earlier, maybe in the second quarter, somewhere around there. But yeah, I just think play calling wise, it was a uh, very interesting strategy. But yeah, no, I mean, I just it's just a protection. Just you just can't expect to win games when you're allowing your quarterback to get sacked four times a half, and you just can't expect to win games when you're running for only 51 yards um, for the whole game, right? So and also another thing is MK Young. I believe he didn't get a carry until what third quarter? Or is it fourth quarter? It was after
Right.
halftime, which yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was the third quarter, but I
Yeah.
mean, point
It was that
point
draw play. Yeah.
point standing, right?
Right. So I just don't know what the strategy was here because let's remember this Vanderbilt offense and the amount of points that they scored, it was like 39 a game coming into today. That's all built off of the run game. So it's built off of Cedric Alexander and MK Young and Pavia, just like the trifecta of them getting these I wouldn't say explosive plays every time, but these really solid run plays and really productive run plays all the time. And that opens up the passing game. And they
Right.
just didn't have that today. And so you just can't expect, to come out with a win and score a lot of points. And again, that's a credit to Iowa's defense. And because, again, they got a really great defense and a really great team and a tough physical team. So you have to credit Iowa in that. But at the same time, it just makes you wonder sort of what the play calling was for probably at least the first half of the game.
Yeah, I think you both have good points there. I think they kind of pigeonhole themselves in a lot of ways, and I guess I'll leave us with a positive and a negative statement here. Um, I thought Vanderbilt's offense played pretty poorly outside of two or three drives today. It didn't get the run game going. Cedric Alexander went for 7 yards on 3 carries. Diego, 2.4 yards a carry, obviously factoring sacks in. Trey Richardson had 3 carries for 1.3 yards, and then MK Young obviously only had one carry, a guy who I think is going to be a big factor for this team down the stretch. Hit on some deep balls to Junior Sherrill and Trey Richardson. I think maybe we forget too, like if there were just as many that I think Trey Richardson probably could have had 3 touchdowns today instead of one. I
Yeah.
think
Hmm.
uncharacteristically, Diego Pavia had some of the worst deep ball throws that I've
Yeah.
seen from him at Vanderbilt. I thought that was the
Some good and some bad for sure.
yeah, I think it was probably the worst first half he's ever played at Vanderbilt.
Hmm.
And you're not trying to diss him here. He had an unbelievable career. You just got to call it like it is and say he wasn't anywhere near his best today. And Vanderbilt's offensive line was probably the worst that we've seen it. It was without his starting center, Jordan White. Good news for Jordan White. Clark Lee says it's not anything serious. I saw him walk off the field with Chris Klonakis, so I guess he's all right. And just want to say good luck to Jordan. He's a tremendous human being, a guy who does a lot for people, and I think it sucked to see the way that that thing ended for him, even as a media member and somebody who uh, does have an objective perspective. Like you sometimes gravitate towards people, and I think Jordan White is the type of guy that you gravitate towards. Just his personality, the way he's committed to being a father figure, the way he is committed to giving back to his grandma. Um, I think he's the type of guy that this program should honor for a long time. And maybe he won't always get the recognition he deserves. He was one of the best centers in the SEC while he played for this program. Just a wonderful human being. And there's a lot of guys like that who have hearts broken tonight. But kind of to wrap it up, I thought Vanderbilt was nowhere near its best. It might have played one of its worst games of the year. And it was still one stop or one deep ball completion away for beating a really good Iowa team that's in the AP top 25 tonight. I think that's probably my word of I guess optimism and negativity. That tells you how good this Vanderbilt team was, and it also tells you and takes you inside kind of the heartbreak that they're feeling tonight. Sucks for those older guys, Langston Patterson. He told me that he still is holding out hope that he'll play another season, but I don't know that that's actually going to be the case. We talked as if it was over for him. Another guy who, a foundational player for this program. A whole lot of them tonight leave the stadium sad, and I'm going to guess a lot of them will be back with their NFL teams in a few years. Eli Stowers, namely Jordan White, namely. But yeah, that's the last we've seen of those guys in a Vanderbilt uniform, and for them it sucks. For the rest of this roster, it sucks. Richie Hoskins obviously leaving the field in tears. Maybe he's an indicator of that, but a special season for Vanderbilt football ends in a way that I think was unfittingly not special. And you learn being around enough teams that that's often the case. Felt like this team would have transcended that. It doesn't though. And now it goes its separate ways. Clark Lee says he feels great about the future of the program. Going to be hard to get back to a place like this, though. Take it in, Vanderbilt fans, and don't let tonight define the way this season has kind of played out. But for Graham Bacco, for Dylan Tovitz, I'm Joey Dwyer. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for following our coverage all season. We're really hitting the ground running with basketball in a few days, so thank you guys for watching. Tune in on Monday. We've got a great guest coming on the podcast. So we'll talk soon. God bless. Peace.